I'm really excited to be here with you, Celia. I'm talking to Celia Grand, and Celia has been working with me and studying with me we both were studying multiple things for many years. And then Celia's taken the embodied attachment work and the becoming safely embodied skills and really like added them into the whole work with EMDR and sensorimotor psychotherapy.
An
And
internal family system.
Oh, and IFS, yes, which I've also done. So we're just going to explore this conversation. A lot of it's going to be new to me too, as I learn and grow from Celia myself. So I'm thrilled to be here and find out more. So Celia, tell me everything.
I will. And I'm really happy that I have this opportunity to have this chat with you. Um, your work is so powerful, Deirdre. I think it really, hones into a piece of psychotherapy that has been hard to really integrate into making really lasting change. So other methods do lasting change, but this is like a little caveat to like make it a little bit smoother.
Hmm.
So I'll talk a little bit about that. I love the frame of your attachment work, the 7 functions of attachment. So for any client, when I'm starting working with developmental trauma, I'll say there's 2 types of trauma. There's developmental attachment relational trauma. That's what we've all categorized it as. And then there's event trauma. And event trauma is what happened to you, like if you were raped or had abuse as a child or car accident, natural disaster. And attachment work is often about things that were missing and didn't happen for you. And then I talk about your 7 functions of attachment and how these normal developmental needs are so hardwired into our system. And when we have a reaction, we have a protest. So I give the frame of your work as a frame for anything that I do, because
Right.
that protest, as you have taught all of us, really uncovers the need. And with the need, on the back end of that is the longing of what you really want. And that really harkens to our true self and our deepest sense of who we are. So that frame begins to sort of flush out and make it really safe for a client to go into the pain. I also do give a little bit of education around memory reconsolidation, because I think that's where neuroscience has gone, and you have beautifully found a very natural way to tap into the true self as that part of our brain that knows, the whole system knows what's curative for us, but we have to hold that against the pain. So
Mhm.
the mind gets reorganized through that memory reconsolidation. So although your work is very deep and there's different skills that to embody that frame, sometimes a client, well, I get clients who want to come to me for EMDR because that's what I'm known for. So if it's memory work, event work, even if it's developmental trauma, I can set up EMDR and do some processing. But when we hit that developmental wound, the 7 functions of attachment can become cognitive interweaves.
All right.
Does that make sense to you? So for those of you not trained in EMDR, is a cognitive interweave is when the brain is processing and it gets stuck. We want to provide a question or a curiosity so that the brain that naturally knows the answer will go to it. But when we're in overwhelm of the pain, sometimes we have a little break in that processing. So the attachment work, if it's feeling unsafe, and really use a cognitive interweave about embodying safety. Has there been a time like there's a deeper part of you that knows how to feel safe? Can we hold that space and go with that? So that can be a way to use your work as a cognitive interweave. I also think it can be, as Janae talked about many years ago about the phases of healing trauma, from the first phase being stabilizing the client. The second phase is processing the trauma. And the third is integration. In EMDR, we use that third phase as a future template. Well, you have beautifully put out the longing and the beautification process of really feeling that deep longing for what we truly know is what we want and what we need, that our system has never failed us. So to really open up and offer that to a client in an EMDR with some reprocessing can be a beautiful way to do a future template. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, but if you're doing EMDR and you kind of stumble upon these little moments in time that you can integrate the work, it just smooths the process beautifully.
Well, that's lovely to hear.
Yeah. So that's how I've been kind of doing it with EMDR. And I'm sure there's probably other ways that I do it, but I can't think of it in the moment. But if I'm doing an IFS session, and I really think your work is really self-energy.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes parts are blended. And so to unblend, instead of working with the part, why not highlight the true self or the self-energy through that deep longing and beautification process to get the self-energy online? I'm not sure. Do you do that when you think about IFS too?
I do, but I also think like the whole idea of protest is so much what our parts are doing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's been my experience that framing protest for people as just a normal and natural experience that actually is guidance for them of where they need to go if they're listening, that it's a way not to reject those parts that are holding the protest and actually value them, and probably in a simple way, and then that then links to, well, what's the need that part had that is so unspoken, and then that part then gets to have a dialogue and speak about it, and that just naturally follows the IFS model.
Right. I definitely feel that too with working with parts, but I find in IFS, and I don't know if other IFS folks feel, that the hardest part is getting the self-energy online. I don't know if that's true for other people, but I find that really framing that inner guidance as the true self or as self-energy seems to make sense and unblend. For that, it's worked for me. So I don't.
Interesting, right?
Yeah. And then also the other thing too is when you find those touchstone moments where self-energy is online, and I guess I'm really talking about what I would say more dissociative complex PTSD, where there's so much blending of parts
right.
that they can get into the protest really easily.
Right, that's so true.
And then you go, and then you go around the barn with the part, like around their protest and what they need. But it's very hard when someone's really super blended to get that self-energy. And if you can have just a touchstone moment of that self-energy, then you can start to build these little micro moments and start to get it more developed, that it's normal and natural to have these longings and that wanting, and to really start to get a felt sense of that versus always feeling dysregulated. Right. And always protesting and always having a need.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I think that it creates a balance for, just a natural regulation of the system. So I think that part is really true.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about, the times I presented at the IFS conference about what happened, the intersubjective matrix, and being able to hold and be with the energy that goes on in between. The client, the unprocessed, non-narrative languages being communicated, what's Daniel Stern called through the intersubjective matrix. It's through it's almost like in the air that we breathe together, and learning how to digest that and to translate it into words and to help the client translate it. So it's another way of interacting with countertransference that I personally have found extremely helpful and transformative in my work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think that your work, in that blend of IFS can be really powerful in that space in between me and the client.
Right.
As Bromberg talked, I think it was in the, that space in between, or the space in between, and Stern with the intersubjective matrix. Very powerful when you can help the client start to feel in their body, and sometimes for a very first time, or not feel the part.
Right. Not be consumed and hijacked by that part. Really good point. Right.
And like today I was doing an IFS session with someone who's very, very new to me, who is so afraid to be inside herself that actually it's a little sensory motor. I did a little boundary work with the pillows last week, created a boundary so that she would feel safe, and she put a blanket on, and then she had this collapse after the session. So I don't want that to happen. I thought it seemed like a good session. She was okay with the collapse, but she had to go nap, and then she started having memory. So, and I'll talk about sensory motor in a minute, but what I did today was I realized that we went too fast, right, to work with the pain and to work with a part. So I just worked on safety. And, I just started like doing the thoughts, feelings, and inner body sensation, and really slowing it down of how to be inside, how to study.
Right.
Like for you and I, and maybe a lot of therapists, we're pretty groomed to go inside and go, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's my inner body sensation? But for someone who's been dissociated and gets really scared to be inside. So we did a little bit of a breakdown of that, and I gave her the homework assignment to do bottom up. Start with your sensation, then what you feel, then what you think, instead of the top down. And so she's going to play with that. But then the more beautiful part was to name how hard it is to feel safe inside.
Right.
That she never, ever felt really safe to even study herself.
Oh, wow. How powerful. What a gift giving her. Right.
Yeah. And so I talked a little bit about safeness, but then we went into the body and into the sensation, and we had to do a little turbulence, that this is what she really wanted to do, is to start to feel safe inside. But there were all these parts, and she had a critical part. She had the skeptic, dismissive skeptic, and then she had an exile there. And so I said, let's not stay with that. Let's just see if we can just bring an image. What would it look like to feel safe inside? Just, don't go with the parts. So I had to like sliver off, and work with just the embodied felt sense of feeling safe. And it started with calm and soothe, and we really nourished that, framed it as nourishment for her system to feel that. And then she had an image of a forest, and we just flushed it out. And I asked her just to start cultivating that space inside, and just to get that a little bit stronger, like a vibration, like a felt sense of that. And then just broadcast to the system that they can come to it, or they don't have to come to it. They can watch it or be with it or join it. There's no right or wrong, and there's no condition around it. It's just a space inside. And probably for the first time in her life, I don't know where it's going to go. I'll find out next week. But just to start to feel what it feels like to feel safe, just a smidget, and ask her to build on it. And not to have the parts. So this was a clinical decision to not do parts work.
Well, it's interesting what you're talking about, because if we really enter body time, when we work with parts, we're working with a concept. We've already moved into a little bit away from the body because we're working with a concept. But what you're talking about is backing it up and slowing it down and slivering time so small that they actually can just ride that tiny little crest
Yes.
before everything comes into play, before a concept develops even. So that's pretty powerful.
And to tiny little bite-sized pieces so it can be digested.
Exactly. That's exactly the point, right? Beautiful.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And that for the therapist, it's so finite that we can miss it so easily.
Right. We're so used to it's very hard to learn to go that slow so that we catch each little rise, crest, and fall, because so much can happen in a moment that we want to untangle this big moment rather than just seeing how does that moment even occur in these tiniest little nanoseconds. That's where we begin to see how the whole sequence is put together. And then once we start gaining awareness, which is mindfulness, then we can compassionately adjust it. It's
Right.
really beautiful.
And the client I'm talking about says she lives constantly in a state of fuzziness. So she's dissociative most of the time. So, for someone who lives in sort of a dissociative state, to come into her body is almost violent.
Mm-hmm. Right. If it's done too quickly and like sort of pushed into her body rather than just gently opening the doors to just
Exactly.
Right.
And last week, it was beautiful work. I mean, it was, and I'll talk about it with sensorimotor work. It was beautiful sensorimotor work, but it was too fast for her.
Right. Right.
It collapsed her.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she looked good, she smelled good, she sounded good when she walked out the door. It was like, yes, beautiful session. But the reverberation or the backlash to the work, right? So
well, that's the beauty of really building an embodied attachment and changing that internal working model is we literally are laying down a solid internal ground. We're building a self-container that can hold and tolerate whatever comes at us. And it's going to come at us. So how do we get strong enough and solid enough inside that we can move so much more effortlessly with life?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I frame that as getting strong from the inside.
Oh,
right?
that's nice. Right. Right.
So, that's what we're doing is getting strong from the inside, but the foundation, and I love for me, that map of the 7 functions of attachment is like key. Like, I'm not going to get anywhere unless someone can feel safe inside.
Right. Paul Gilbert really helped me get that difference too between just physical safety and then this emotional and psychological safety inside, that there is a big difference, and it shows up, it really what separates us from mammals. Mammals need to be physically safe, but then we as humans need that more psychological safety and the emotional safety and if we don't have that, that's really the foundation of attachment disruption.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so, yeah, it's so profound. I don't know. I'm kind of reeling off this session in terms of like really getting somebody for the very first time, really starting to feel into an embodied sense of safeness.
Right. Right. Lovely. That's nice.
Yeah. And again, like the intersubjective matrix gets a little squirrely because like I'm thinking, God, am I doing this right? Is she going to get it? Is this too much? Is this too little? Because it's hard with someone who's dissociative. They kind of fog in and out. It's hard to really get a good sense.
Right, right. And to look for what Carlin Lyons Ruth talks about is that next developmental step. How do we scaffold the experience so we're not jumping over, we're not trying to push people to a larger step than they can take, but we're really like, okay, what can they that's the step they can take right now, which is just here, what here. And then, and really that's how transformation happens. It's not these big leaps that we think it is. Oh, it's
Right.
so good to hear. So I know I'm aware of the time, so I just want to check in. Was there more you want to say about?
Well, I just want to talk about sensorimotor psychotherapy because, you know, it's a method I employ. It's, one I taught.
It's a powerful method for sure.
Right. And, you know, for those people who are trained in sensorimotor, or if you're not trained, there's a 5-step process, where you frame the work, you access the pain, you access where you're going to go, and then you're working with the pain, and then there's transformation and integration. Those are 5 steps. Well, the hardest part is in that going through the pain into transformation.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can get really stuck when you uncover and process through the pain. But sometimes people can get really stuck or get dissociative. So that's where I started thinking about how the embodied safely attachment skills come in to help contain the process. So like really framing the part as a protest or the pain as a protest. It doesn't even have to be a part. It's just an embodied felt sense of pain is the way that system is saying it shouldn't be this way.
Right. It's so trusting their own inner guidance. Personally, I love that.
Right. And then the transformation comes with, again, up against that longing and providing the nourishing opposite.
Right.
Right. So to provide the nourishing opposite up against that pain really starts to flush the transformational state. And then for those people who are sensorimotor psychotherapy trained, then your core organizers around that new felt experience.
Right.
So that's how so I really see your work very integrative with the transformational process. Not that it isn't good for the framing, because it's beautiful for frame, and access and the going into the pain, right? But the transformation was one area that I thought we never really flushed out enough. And I think that's where long-lasting change happens, when you have an embodied felt sense of a transformation.
Right. And when your body remembers what you've always known, you've known deep inside of you should always be that way. That's when you return to that or even taste it, it's like that relaxation that happens in body, mind, spirit, and the heart just makes it easier to return there over and over. That's beautiful. Thank you, Celia.
Yeah. So integrating these other methods, and then I do straight your work. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like sometimes the spade is just.
I don't know anymore if there is such a thing as a straight anything. I think there's so much integration going on, which is wonderful in psychotherapy, that people are really accessing some beautiful pieces and weaving them together, and it's making a huge difference for people, and they're getting better.
I agree. And your work is so simple, but such a subtle process that I really believe builds self-structure, in a felt safe, embodied way. And that once the self-structure can be felt, then it's a little bit easier to feel that deeply feared attachment wound.
Right. We have to have enough in order to really feel the deep anguish that an attachment shock that happened. We need to have enough sense of a buffer zone, enough sense of goodness and kindness and compassion that we can actually dip into the other stuff. If we're always in the pain, and this is the big problem for people, they're always in the pain and they never get a chance to get out of it. Their system doesn't get any relief. So it's really so necessary for people to take a break from being accosted all the time by their own pain, and remember other ways of being. And they certainly are there for everybody, no matter how much pain we're in.
Right. And the last thing I would say about your work is it really offers a softening to go into those precious wounds, to really see them as precious wounds that will help us return to ourselves and be able to trust ourselves, which is usually where, you know, a person really suffers, is when they feel they can't trust themselves anymore.
Right, 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 right. What a
And
beautiful.
trust their own experience and
Right,
trust their own beingness
right.
and trust that they have a higher self that can, you know, help soothe the path when life gets challenging.
I agree. Oh, I'm so glad you're getting that and pulling that out, Celia. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's total delight for me.
And I as well.